Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Patrick Burke and I'm a director here at Mob Lab. Thank you for joining our webinar labeled Econ Games to bring students back to the classroom. I see many familiar names, so thanks for joining, and also many new ones as well. With me today is Professor Kelvin Wong from Arizona State University. Kelvin, thank you for joining us today, and we're excited to hear about how you have used and plan on using Mob Lab in your classes this fall. So on our agenda today, I will let Professor Wong introduce himself in just a moment and let him talk about his experience using Mob Lab. And then we'll allow you all to participate in an active session for a chance to win prizes. And finally, we will wrap up with some Q&A as well. So again, please feel welcome to reach out to a Mob Lab member if you have any direct questions, or post your more general questions about Mob Lab or Kelvin's teaching experience into the Q&A function. So Kelvin, I will pass it along to you right here and let you introduce yourself, and I'll stop sharing at the moment and we can get started. So thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. So thanks for everyone for joining. My name is Kelvin Wong. I am a professor in the economics department at Arizona State University. I generally teach classes that are large lecture courses between 300 to 400 students, but I also do teach some smaller honor section of the principles of microeconomics, mainly for in each semester is one. Those are about 50 students each. My format for classes, just so I can kind of mention that, is either twice a week for 75 minutes a week, or 3 times a week for 50 minutes a week, which I think is pretty standard, for other universities as well. I do teach in a lecture format, so I don't have like the flipped classroom. There's no like lecture videos that students watch before coming to class. The main source of their instruction is through my class, and so just sort of to give some background information on that, the classes I teach. Now, the things that I'll share today is sort of what I have seen work in my class, and something that I think can be fit into different settings as well. So just because I don't teach in the same settings or the same class sizes or whatnot, I don't think that means that there's no connection between some of these things and that situation. But would love to chat more about specifically your situation. If there's any questions at the end, please do ask about how maybe this can relate to your classroom. So, just my thoughts. At Arizona State, we went fully remote last year. So we, students, attended through Zoom, and it was certainly a different teaching experience. I know for many of you, perhaps that was the same here. And so I'm very excited to get back into the classroom. Of course, still very lots of uncertainty hanging over our heads, going back this semester. We are fully in person at ASU this coming year. We are anticipating, no kind of remote learning element to it, even though we have the investment in the infrastructure. But I think that really does help drive students back to the classroom. So, what I'm looking at, and we're starting in about a couple weeks, we start mid-August, is a classroom, a large lecture room filled with students, just like it was 2 years ago. And so that's sort of where I'm going back to. Now, I'm not going to go approach my class, though, as if nothing has happened in the last year and a half, because I think students are a little different after having gone through a year of remote learning. So I do anticipate that the pandemic has changed things. But one thing I will hopefully predict is that it probably didn't change how students learn best, right? So the pandemic, I think, will change a lot, but the key is still to actively engage them. I think prior to the pandemic, that was sort of my philosophy on teaching, is like they need to be actively engaged in the material and learning. I can't just be talking at them for 50 minutes. And so I think that's more than ever true after the pandemic here. But I do think it might affect how students, the pandemic, affect how they interact or how they desire to interact with others. I think having a year with no classmates that sit next to you. I've talked to enough students in Zoom office hours who have expressed how much they long for that social interaction. They're just sitting at home, attending classes, maybe not seeing anybody but their parents or siblings for the whole day. And they just long for interactions. And so a lot of my students turn to like Discord or Slack, to communicate with their classmates, just to get that community back in there. And I think this is, on a group work level, like, students want to work with other people, they want to interact with people, but I think also on a class-wide community level, I think just being a part of something again, going back to the classroom, I'm part of this class. I do think students miss that. Like, they miss sitting in a room, seeing that these are all the other students in my class. And that's something that I think, from the last year, just talking with students, I found that students have really missed. But of course, there's still uncertainty looming over the school year. I'll be foolish to say 100%, we're going to make it through this year, no problem, especially with the Delta variant and all of that. I mean, I'm as much just planning for the next week, right, as I am planning for the whole semester. So I think having some flexibility in whatever we do is still very important. And so that's just something to bring up. MobLab has been great over the pandemic with asynchronous and synchronous learning. They launched an assignment tool just recently, which makes it a lot easier to do asynchronous type work. And so if it does become, the online again, I do know that there'll be tools to use from MobLab. But my solution for all of this, as you might guess, since this is the MobLab webinar, is using MobLab. I've used MobLab now for 7 years in my classes, and I've really found it just so helpful to use like little surveys and quizzes to engage students. I think MobLab has, it's known for its games, and that's what we're going to showcase today. But I don't want to just ignore the surveys and quizzes within MobLab as well. So I'll just talk really briefly about that. On a day-to-day basis in my classes, I always will have at least 1 or 2 surveys and quiz within the class. Now, surveys could be anything from just getting students to think about something. I'm about to teach on a topic and I ask maybe an interesting question and see what they think about that question. And I always allow students to talk with each other for surveys and quizzes. And this is the community aspect where they get to work together, they get to discuss something, and you can instantly see how students thought about a certain problem. Now, another really good use of surveys that I've used, especially over the pandemic, is to just ask students how they're doing. A lot of times, students in a large lecture or even in remote learning, or even maybe in a small class, if they're shy, find it really hard to speak up and say that they're struggling with something or that they're going through stuff. But you'll be surprised, just asking them questions of like, how's your week been? Or how has the last few weeks been for you? And, I know pandemic's been tough, like what's going on? Students tend to share things that really give you an insight as to who's in your class. Students who are telling me about how they can't afford rent and have to, they're like in the process of moving out and that's really stressful, or, all of their whole family got COVID and now they're dealing with quarantining. And I mean, it just really does give you insight, and it also gives you an opportunity to reach out and maybe just show support in some way. And so that has been my favorite use of, the survey tool, is just to really get a sense of how students are doing. I also ask them after each topic what questions they have. And so this is akin to like, like some classes suggest like after every class, write down on a piece of paper a question that you have or something that you learn. You can do that in MobLab really easily and collect all of that data digitally and not have to collect pieces of paper. So those are just some ways I use surveys. And quizzes basically are, they're the same. They're just questions, but these are questions that have right or wrong answers. And so when I, ask students to maybe work on an example after I just showed it on the board, they can, work through it with one another and in their groups and try to see if they can, redo this with a different set of numbers or something like that. So that's how surveys and quizzes are used in my class. I do this every class, and You might think that students hate this because when I was in school, I hate pop quizzes, but every year in course evals, I haven't seen a single student who said that the daily quizzes were annoying or like, I didn't like them. In fact, they say I really found it helpful because it kept me engaged like over and over again. So I'm always surprised because I thought this might be, something students won't enjoy, but I think they do appreciate having something to test their knowledge right away and to help them refocus on the question at hand. So I think that's certainly a good use of it. Of course, the second thing I want to talk about is the games, which is what we want to showcase today. And so the games in MobLab, there's a ton of them. You will never use all of the games in MobLab in a single class, but there are good games for different topics. So let me actually share my screen here. I'm going to go to or I already have my screen share. Let me show the window here for MobLab that I have. There are a ton of games that you can look at, and I can just show you just really briefly their game catalog. But you can see, you can search for different games. Like the one that we're going to go over today, and the most popular game, and I think the one that has the widest range of application is the competitive market game, which is what we want to use today. But there's a lot of other games that you can search through. You can like preview and see what's going on. And like I said, you're not going to use all of the games, but I think, if there's a game that fits with a lecture that you're using to kind of get students' attention for something, I think that'll be a really good use of that. So now I'm not going to go through too much on the instructor console. I'm not going to show like how do you use this because, the purpose of this was really just to showcase the games. I don't want to, bore everyone with like, okay, click here, click there, drag this here, drag this there. But MobLab had mentioned that, if you have any questions about the usage of the instructor console, like let's say you're a new user, you have no clue what to click, reach out to MobLab. In fact, I remember 6-7 years ago when I first started using MobLab, that's what I did. I went in and I just said, someone can just walk me through and that'll be great. And someone did. And it was very helpful just to get started, just to see what I can do. And so that's, 100% recommend just reaching out for a quick, demonstration of how to use the instructor console if you're new to MobLab. But really easy to add a game. So we're going to play the competitive market game. So suppose you want to play this in your class. You would just click on the add button. You can add it to whatever playlist. I already actually have some games set up, but I'll add this to the default playlist just to kind of show you, how easy it is to just change settings and do different things. We do have about 30 of you here today. And so, you can put every student in a group, or maybe you can put them all in the same classroom. That's maybe a tip that I have is if your class is not like abnormally large. So if it's like less than 100-ish students, putting them all in a group might be fun because it does create this community sense, right? Students love playing against each other. They love winning, right? Playing against each other is great, but they want to win. And so when you tell them that they're in the same game as all of their classmates, and there might be some bonus points or whatnot for high scores, students really, really get into it. And that's one of the things that I love about these games is that even though we as instructors might look at these and compare to like games that kids are playing nowadays, and we're like, how is a game, buying and selling orange going to compare to like a game where you are like, I don't know, raising a pet or shooting things? You'll be surprised at how much students get into this because there's this competition aspect. And so it's not rare at all. It's actually pretty common in a classroom setting for me to kind of look around during the game and see kind of a lot of smiles and people kind of like throwing their hands up because they made a bad trade or something like that. It's actually really fun, in the classroom. So I definitely am looking forward to that, in the next few weeks when I do run this game in my class. But, MobLab was built by experimental economists. And so in, other games, other experimental games that I've used before MobLab, there really weren't much settings you can change. Whereas in MobLab, you do have a lot of flexibilities and parameters. And so you can see even in the competitive market game, you can change things if you want to. If you don't, the default works perfect. But I like to change, the group size, and you can kind of change the supply and demand. Maybe you're talking about a specific example in your classroom. You can have it mirror that example that you're going over in your class. So, and you can, change numbers for, supply and demand, and you can kind of see, okay, if I change it, for example, you know, I want to change the demand curve to look, you know, more like this. And you can kind of see what the supply and demand will currently look like in this market. You can get you know, the equilibrium is 75 cents. We expect 26 units to be transacted in this market. And as you change things here, you can see those numbers change as well. So you can play around with those settings for sure. You can also see here, I'm not going to talk too much about these, but you can add like price controls, tax and subsidies, change how many units of the product people are buying and selling. You can do a lot of those things in this one game, right? This is just one game. Okay, so one thing I do want to show you though is to preview, because maybe you're trying to test this out yourself. You don't know what it's about yet. You can click preview to kind of get a sense of the game. There's also guide if you want to read before you play. If you're like, I want to read before going into the game, if you know that's how you learn, the guide will kind of teach you about the game and tell you what the learning objectives are. So every game has a guide, and it kind of tells you what you can teach students, and it also kind of tells you like what instructions there are. Again, you don't have to read this, right? If you don't want to do a hands-on, if you want to do a less hands-on approach, you can read it, but you can also just click preview and to kind of play around. So if you click preview, it's going to basically load up the game with your current parameters, and you kind of play as a student would, right? And so you can kind of get a sense of the controls. You're playing against robots here. So since we're going to play this game in a little bit, let me just also kind of teach you the basics of this game, because you'll be playing this. And so I want to make sure you know what you're doing in a bit, but that way you can also get the hands-on first person, you know, learning for this. So if you have not yet logged into MobLab with the user account that you were sent before the webinar, this is a great time to do so. If you don't have it, or if you can't log on for some reason, please use the chat to you know, let the MobLab team know. They'll help you make sure you can get you know, set into the game. So once you're in the game, you're told whether you're a buyer or seller. You're basically buying or selling oranges in this game. And each of you buy either 3 oranges or sell 3 oranges. Okay, so you have 3 oranges you're either buying or selling. The value here is going to tell you how much you value an orange. And so you can sort of bid for an orange. And MobLab has, you know, this sort of profit calculator that calculates how much profit you would make if you were to be able to buy an orange at this bidding price. Now, of course, I could bid 17 cents, but it doesn't mean that I actually will buy an orange at 17 cents, right? Because it's just a bid. So, you know, now that I clicked on bid and nothing is happening is because, well, if you look at the current highest 3 bids and the lowest 3 asking price, 17 cents is, of course, not going to get any attention, right? And so if I was a buyer to buy something, I would need to probably raise my price. And so if I raise it to, let's say, 77 cents and I bid, I know I could do better, but then it says, I got an orange because right away I got matched with a seller. Now, instead of, you know, pulling this slider back and forth, you can also click on the buy at lowest ask. So if, let's say, 78 cents is a good price, which, well, the round is over now, but if 78 cents was a good price and I want to just buy an orange for 78 cents without dragging the slider, I can just click on the buy at lowest asking price as well, and I'll instantly buy that orange for me as well. After each round, there is usually like a 10-second wait before the next round starts, but since this is a preview, there's just one round. So that's sort of all that there is. Let me open the preview up again, just to show you one last thing. This table on the top right is the current transactions that are happening. So, you know, as the market goes along, you can start seeing like transaction happen at these prices, 90 cents and so forth. And you can sort of do your thing. So, you know, so I'll do this here. The lowest asking price is $1 right now. And let's say I'm a student and I'm like, that sounds good, even though my value is 97 cents. Well, now it's 93. But if I click on the buy at lowest ask, instantly I get it at the lowest asking price. And that's just a quick way to do it. Now, beware when you click this button, because you know, these numbers might not last. If someone snatches them up first, you know, the lowest asking price might not be one that you actually want when you click on it. So just be careful when you click on this. So if you're a seller, it's pretty much the same thing. You, instead of value, you see here your costs. So how much did it cost you to make that orange? And then you're going to you know, drag the slider back and forth and ask for a certain amount in order to sell that orange, right? So it's just the reverse. Okay, now if this was a classroom, if I was talking to a bunch of students, you know, I wouldn't just have the game open and talk to them like that. There are slides that you can use on MobLab. that they prepared ahead of time, or is actually easy to show them, whatever size you have too. But if you click on instructions, one thing I like to do is I like to give students these instructions ahead of time before class and have them just go over it. There's an instruction video that they can watch where it kind of goes over everything, like the controls, what they should, look at, what they should be aware of, and all of that stuff. So you don't have to do any of this instruction work if you don't want to, right? Some of my colleagues just play the video and that's it. Or you can, of course, like I said, also, kind of post them this stuff ahead of time. You can share this link on your LMS and it'll be easy to just access this page right away. All right, now without further ado then, I want to just have you guys try this. This is not the game that will determine who gets the gift card. That will be the next game. But I'm going to have you play in this market game. There's going to be here, I'm going to just do 2 rounds. So let me change this setting here. We're going to do, let's say 2 rounds here. And there's a 10-second pause between, I'm going to rotate your rows. So you're going to be either a buyer in the first round and a seller in the second round, or a seller in the first round and a buyer in the second round. And that way you can kind of get a sense of both of these rows. And just for the sake of time, because you guys are all probably very, aware of the market and the, this maybe setup, instead of the 2 minutes, I'm going to just do 1.5 minutes, just so that we can move along a little bit quicker. Again, this is just really a warm up so that you guys can get a sense of this game. So now on the student side, it'll be done. Now on the instructor side, so here's my screen again, back to the instructor side, you can kind of see it says now the game is finished. So I'm just going to click finish as well. The nice thing about MobLab is, we used to do these kind of games in person, having people walk around, and there's fun in that. But always the tabulation is extremely tedious, right? You have students go to the board and say like, okay, put in your order, like tell me what you bought, what you sold, or I'm going to put it all together after class. But with the click of a button, just clicking on results, now MobLab automatically just does all of that work. And so you can kind of see even in our game, what I like to do, by the way, when I present this to the class. So I before I share this, my screen with the class with the results, I like to uncheck all the boxes here to kind of have just a blank state. And then when I share the screen again, I tell them, look, you were each, if you were a seller, a point on this supply curve. Like you had 3 points. Like maybe you had a 60 cents cost for the first orange, maybe an 80 cents cost for the second, maybe 85 cents for the third orange, right? So you were 3 points in the supply curve. And for a buyer, I would say the same thing. You were 3 points on a demand curve, right? 3 points denoting your value of an orange. And something that we would have mentioned before the game, and I'll talk a little bit about when you play this game. Would you play this before you teach about the equilibrium or after? I typically mention the word equilibrium and I say markets tend to reach an equilibrium. But before I explain why, I say, let's play a game to explore that a little bit more. And so in this case, I would mention before the game that where supply equals demand is the market equilibrium. Now, students would not know why, they just know that that's the case. But I would say here, look, the equilibrium where the supply equals demand is at 75 cents, right, in this game. So let's see how our transactions lined up with that. So this is the point where I would show them that these are your transactions in the game, right? There's no other force going on. It's just the students playing. And they will kind of see that all these transactions tend to happen, along the 75 cent mark. I want to show you too one of my results from one of my games in the spring. I mean, I have a ton of these, but this is just my spring game. This is in this game, there's 40 students, I think. But, I separate, groups into my whole class into a few groups. Because if you do like 300, 400 students in a group, the market just moves way too fast. And so that might make, some students get less out of it. So I break them into groups of 40, but you can kind of see how like, in all of these groups, there's this kind of convergence that goes towards this equilibrium. None of them or you knew what the equilibrium price was, but you can see how gradually it seems like it approaches that or stays there, right? So this is like the second round when I had them switch rows. You can see maybe at first it starts off wider, it goes more narrow. And you can see that this is consistent in all these games. So this is one of the games with like the most powerful results, where students see that the prediction in theory is what actually ends up happening. Now, of course, the powerful part of all of this is not just to go from here and say, see, I told you that's the equilibrium, and then exit, right? That's not what would work best. But, you know, from here, I would typically go into a discussion with them of what just happened, right? I would ask them questions like, okay, well, let's go back to the game. Why did we get to an equilibrium? So if you were a seller, what was your object? Like, what was the dream for you as a seller? And students will always say, I want to sell oranges for like $3. That's the highest price you can charge, right? And so great, you make as much profit as possible if you sell for a high price. But why didn't you do that? Why didn't you charge $3 for an orange? Then all the sellers would say, well, we couldn't because no one's going to buy from us. Okay, good. So what happens? If no one's buying from you, what do? We lowered our prices. Like, we couldn't ask for as much. Great. So there's this downward pressure if the price is too high. I asked the buyers the same question, like, okay, so what would you have liked to do in the game? Get a free orange, of course. I would want to pay $0 for an orange. Well, why didn't you do that? I couldn't. When I bid zero, no one's going to sell it to me. So what did you do? I raised the price. Well, now they start seeing, you know, why is there this force towards an equilibrium convergence? Because if the price is too high or too low, there is this pressure that pushes it up or down, right? So them seeing this and them doing this firsthand helps them to not just look at the supply and demand diagram as, you know, oh, I know that at the middle of the X, the point right there, like that's the equilibrium. That's all I know, right? Now they maybe know the mechanism through which that's the equilibrium. And I think that's a very powerful thing, because throughout the entire semester, I always go back to the Mob Lab game, right? When I talk about international trade and why prices have to go up when there's a quota, I say, do you remember the orange game that we played, right? If the prices don't go up, there's now going to be a shortage, right? And the price has to go up because there's a shortage. And students remember, and they're like, okay, it's the same exact mechanism that I participated in, and so I remember. Versus I don't remember that, right? That was just from a few chapters ago. It was on a piece of paper. I don't know. So it's just a really powerful tool for students to actually put their hands into the learning and remembering it even weeks after. And so that's just something that I'm always excited about, when I can bring it back up again and students remember and they get it, they tell me about it. And I say, this is exactly the same thing happening in this model as in the last model. So let me finish here. Now, you might have noticed during the game, you know, I said I changed something and I wasn't going to tell you what it was. But of course, I changed the demand, right? So the demand, instead of being, I shifted it to the right. So you know, things will look a little bit with higher prices and stuff like that. So now this is one thing you can do in your classes too, if you're teaching on like shifting. You see now the equilibrium price is expected to be 89 cents. Before, in the last game, it was 75 cents. Let me show you the last game again. So back here, 75 cents was the expected equilibrium price. Now it's 89 cents. But you can see how, you know, typically if this is a classroom, students tend to remember like their last experience. So they tend to try to buy and sell from that. And then just quickly realize, like, wait a minute, I could be making more profit from selling oranges. I don't have to sell at 75 cents. Like, people are buying it up for like 90 cents right now. And so it's really interesting at first, because you tend to see this kind of gradual convergence up to the 90 cents, usually from the last equilibrium price. And that's something that, you know, you guys found out right away pretty much. You didn't fall for that. And you basically were buying and selling at 90 cents. So I think this is powerful because, you know, when we talk about stuff like how to use the supply and demand model, you know, actually 2020, and I kind of found this out recently, 2020 was like the best year, one of the best years for oranges. The demand for oranges was like sky high, and prices of orange went up and all of those things, right? And so, I mean, this is the orange market. You don't have to use oranges. You can use like face masks, you know, in the middle of a pandemic. You can use whatever you want. But I just think it's a really powerful tool to kind of have this discussion after the game and say, well, why did the price go up then? You know, because, okay, well, when the demand changes, people are willing to pay more for things. And now you start seeing this, you know, this upward pressure on the price, because at the original price, there's now going to be a shortage. Everyone wants to buy a face mask at the original price, but now like there's excess demand. And so sellers realize that, and they're like, well, why do I have to sell for that low price now? So that upward pressure takes the price up when there's a shift. So having that discussion, once again, really does help students see that this is the same mechanism of excess demand, excess supply pushing the price around. And I think that's just a really powerful tool for them to see as well, that this is them. Like, this is not just a textbook, right? This is not predetermined results. This is them buying and selling in a market. And so that's something that I love doing. Now, I didn't show you this because I didn't want to, sort of add any complexity. But if let's say you have a class and you only have like 7 or 8 students, you're like, can I play this? There's a way to add robots to the game, so you can have the 7, 8 students play and then add like a bunch, like 10 robots, 20 robots, just so that the market actually also flows pretty well. So that's certainly an option. The robot players play pretty realistically as well, so it's not like totally random. So that's the nice aspect of it. I want to wrap up here because I want to leave some time for questions if there are any. I want to give some tips, right? Because I think it's overwhelming every time there's something new to integrate. I mean, it's the same challenge for every professor. I mean, I face the same challenge when I see something new that looks good. I'm always like, but my class is already exactly the way I might want it, or maybe the time that I'm using exactly fits perfectly. If I add anything, I have to take stuff away. That's usually the biggest drawback, and I agree. But I also want to mention that using experiments or surveys and quizzes from MobLab doesn't mean you have to change your entire course, right? I would always recommend starting small. The first semester that I used MobLab, I actually just played the one game. That's it. I played the market game, and that was all I did. And then the next semester, I was like, well, that was really good. Students like gave good course evals for those. Like, they really loved that. They seemed like they learned a lot. I got a lot out of it because students tend to get these topics more. So maybe I'll do that game and something else, right? And then I started doing more active learning stuff with like the surveys and the quizzes. So, my recommendation of starting small could be just having one survey or one quiz in each class. Maybe at the beginning to kind of get their attention, maybe at the end to quiz them or to see how they're doing, or maybe in the middle to help them refocus, right? Maybe start with just that. And then have one game in a semester. Maybe start with a market game. Or maybe if you do a lot of, let's say, game theory, or if you have more macro topics and you want to talk about like bank runs or how asset prices are determined or whatnot, maybe having that game instead. So those are definitely options as well. One big tip is to have clear instructions. Students, I mean, it's hard to figure stuff out on the fly, right? If you're going to the classroom and you want to play a game and you just click, I'm going to click start, just figure it out, students aren't going to get as much out of it. So I think either making sure you share with them the instructions that MobLab has made, the video instructions and the PowerPoints, maybe going through it yourself if you want to like share with the class really briefly before the game, just making sure they're all on the same page. That really adds a lot to it, because when students know what they're doing, then they actually get to focus on the learning part. But if they're not really sure what they're doing, then they are just focusing on trying to play the game. So that's one tip, is to use MobLab's instructions, send them before time, maybe talk to the class before the game a little bit, 5 minutes, just to kind of talk about what they're going to do in the game, what their objective is, so they know what to expect. And then allow students to interact. These games, I didn't turn this on in the game, but you can have chat open. So you can have people chat in the class, right? I mean, within MobLab about the game. I generally don't like having chat for like games with like 30, 40 students in a room for obvious reasons. But when I do game theory games, I love having the chat on because you really get to see how they interact, right? I mean, a lot of them might say, hey, let's just do this. And they both agree to, and then like one person cheats or something. It is like the perfect way to show why, cooperation sometimes fail when it is even if it's like the greatest payoff for the corporate, for both of the players, right? So I think it's a great idea to have chat. And really, as I mentioned at the beginning with the pandemic, students do want to interact. And so I think having interaction, whether is in the game, or if you're doing surveys and quizzes, maybe have them be able to work with each other. Maybe make it okay for them to talk about the answers together. I do really think that adds a lot to the classroom when they can talk with the people around them about something that we're doing in the class, versus just have to sneak talk to the person next to them about anything because the professor doesn't want them to be discussing or something. So I do think allowing students to interact really does help. The last thing I will say is use MobLab support abundantly. MobLab, over the years, I've built a lot of just great relationship with a lot of the support team. I mean, they're great. I mean, I always share this example because I think it's incredible. One time, or a few times actually, this happened. A student would walk up to me at the beginning of class saying, "Hey, I forgot my password, or I got locked out of MobLab and like I couldn't log in and like blah, blah." And I said, "Look, just email support@moblab.com. And they're really good at, getting back to you and all that stuff." So they go back to their seats, and then after class, they would come and say, "Oh, by the way, MobLab responded to me in like 10 minutes. So everything was taken care of. They set up, they unlocked me and reset my password. Everything was good to go." And I'm always surprised because like they were surprised too. They're like, "I can't believe they responded to me this fast." And for me, it's just over the years, I've realized like this is just MobLab support. They make a priority to support students and faculty. And I've really just benefited from that a lot every year. So I do give kudos to the support team. And I know a few of them are here right now, and I don't mean to, make them blush, but I really have appreciated all of your help and support, because it makes teaching a lot easier when I don't have to deal with any of these tech issues. So thank you for that. So that's all I have. If there are any questions, I would love to, do what I can to answer. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate, your attention and time today.
And one question is, how much time do you allocate to each game? Does it take up a full class period? How much of your live lecture time is spent doing so?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the nice thing is it's super flexible. So I have made the game as short as like 10 minutes, just to kind of instruct and then play it, and that's it. And maybe like discuss the results next class or in an announcement post because I'm running out of time. I've made it like the entire class because you can do different extensions with it. If you want to like not just be talking about supply and demand, for example, but you want to talk about how when things shift, different things happen, or you want to add a tax or a subsidy to it, right? There are ways to build it up. So for those who are thinking like, well, I have SI or TA sessions, like it would be really fun to just have a whole session playing these games. Or if you want to do it in the classroom, you can make it as short as you want. You can play one round and then talk about the results. You can play 3-4 rounds like I do in class and take maybe 15 to 20 minutes. So it's really totally up to how much time you have for that class. I typically try to allocate 20 minutes for the market game because I really do think that's enough for them to play and then for us to discuss the results. But yeah, it's super flexible with how much time you want to put in.
Right. And continuing on that, and for your principles and micro classes, you mentioned that you first started with this game. And another question we got was, which game and experiment has been the most impactful in your micro econ courses besides this game? Of course, you can cover price controls and taxes and elasticities, but is there another game that you like to rely on?
Yeah, I mean, I think game theory, I love teaching on game theory, but I didn't always love teaching on game theory. I love teaching on game theory after I could play these games with students and just showing them a game, having them play it right away, talking about the incentives. I mean, people like don't really get like the incentive to cheat. When you talk about the incentive to deviate from a result or something like that, they're like, why would you deviate from a result? Like, it doesn't make sense. And then they play it and they realize like, wait, the other person just backstabbed me. They said they were going to do this and now they did that. I think being able to experience that and then talk about it is so much more powerful than just on a screen say, trust me guys, this is what's going to happen. Like, that's why that's not the Nash equilibrium. And this is, I think having them play it is just so much more powerful and relevant for them. And so I definitely rely on the game theory games a lot. I also like playing the public goods, the fishing game, the Tragedy of the Commons game, because it's one thing to just say like common resources get depleted. It's another to say, hey, you're all going on a fishing trip, going fishing, and go right, and they fish and they all overfish, and they're always surprised. They always laugh after the first round, like, what? Where are all the fish? And it's such a powerful tool because it's like, okay, let's talk about where the fish went. Right. And we're going to talk about Tragedy of the Commons here. And it's just so much better to do something like that versus to say like, well, the idea is, this happens. And so just trust me on it. So those are the games that always I look forward to playing in class.
Thank you. And speaking of incentives, how do you give credit for either participation and things such as that using MobLab in your class? Which is another question we got. And also another maybe related question was seeing the results of the survey. And I don't know if you have some sample survey results that you'd like to share. And so kind of a two-ended question, because I know you like to run the surveys in class as kind of assessment questions and everything.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to try to pull up something while I'm talking here. But as far as incentives go, I like to just give bonus points. I don't, like students never get their grades hurt by doing poorly in a game. If they're participating, I want to give them something to account for. Now, the nice thing is that even if the bonus points don't really end up being much, like even if they're like 0.01% of their course grade, like, getting that point, they still really, really want that point. They think that that point is going to make the difference between getting a C and an A. I mean, this is like the case every semester. Students, I tried actually giving cash prizes before, but they would rather have bonus points, right? Because that's just how powerful bonus points are. So I just give some, tiny bit of extra credit. If you do well, you get more. If you don't do well and you just participated, you get some. So I kind of like base it off of their score usually. And that way it also gives them an incentive to try because they know they can earn more points if they do well in the game. So that's sort of the idea. As far as like sample surveys, I'll kind of share, let's see here. I'll share my screen again. I don't have anything like specific, but this is my class in the spring. So last semester, you can kind of see like these are all the quizzes I've run over the semester, and some of them are quizzes, some of them are surveys. So I mean, for example, like my very first quiz, quote unquote quiz, I call it everything quiz. My very first one is just actually a survey that asked them some questions so I can know them better. So I can do sort of just show you the questions here. So here's just a short quiz, 12 questions for me to know a little bit more about you. Like, do you have a nickname that you prefer going by? I love asking them this question because some students, like, they don't go by their roster name, and there's nothing less personal than a professor emailing you by the name that you never use, right? So I think having a list of, again, these results you can download from an Excel file. So what I love doing after the first day of class is I download it, and every time like I get an email, I kind of like cross-check and see like, what does the student go by? And it really makes a difference. It seems like it's a small thing, but I think it really makes a huge difference when you can call someone by the name that they want to be called by versus just, whatever name is on their roster. Also, like, there's a bunch of stuff I ask, like, what best describes your motivation? Just stuff that there's no right or wrong answer. But then I talk about like remote classes. How do I make this a better experience for you? So this is an example of something that's like a survey, whereas a quiz could be more or less I think this is also a survey. I do like an ice cream demonstration. So like I have them kind of guess stuff. And so that's also, so for example, like, here's a quiz, right? Maybe it's in class, I'm talking about a specific example, and I have the sort of like the slide on the question as well. And you can see how I asked like quiz question 1, 2, and 3. Now in this version of the quiz, the quiz questions were on the screen. So I just wanted to make sure that they were in class. And you can always see the results, right? You can see how students did on these questions, and then you can kind of talk about, each one. So like, this is the quiz question 1. How did students do? They, for the most part, got things correct. They thought, that these things were substitutes and not complements. So you can kind of like address these things pretty easily. But I'll show you maybe another quiz. But a lot of times I just put the question like right into the question itself. So you can see here, I give the table and I ask them a question. So these are just some examples of like quiz and survey questions that you can ask. You can add pictures, you can add videos, and you can, whether you select correct answers or not, that's totally fine. In my class, everything is worth a point, every MobLab question. And so it all adds up anyway. So whether it's a survey or a quiz, they still get a point for each question answered. So yeah, so that's I use surveys and quizzes.
Thank you. And the individual who asked that question, you can set that to have correct answers or open-ended questions, based on their preference or risk preference even, or something, kind of have some fun with it. And one more question, I know we're running out of time, is, on occasions where you do set up more than one game within a single class, and then do you teach and lecture between the games as you did? Do you prime them with a practice round, teach a bit, and then get into the, maybe the one that counts for extra credit points or something?
Yeah.
How do you set up your class? Yeah.
Yeah. If it was up to me and I had like all the time in the world in the class, I would always make sure I discuss the game after I play it, because that's when it's fresh on students' minds. But sometimes, you run out of time, like it's the end of the period, you didn't have a time to discuss it yet, but you can run the game. There's a few times where that happened where, I would play the game, class ends, and then next class I'll talk about it. As far as like setting up more than one game, I do that a lot with game theory games because they're relatively quicker. Like they're like 1 minute rounds and they play against each other. I talk in between and then I play again. This time I'll let them chat with each other and match them up with new partners or something like that. So I definitely have games where I can run multiple ones. But I think like for bigger games like the market game, I tend to stick with just one game a class, because if you do too many, I feel like it might take away from each. Really doing one well and helping them understand like, okay, that's how that works is better than having them do two and then be like, well, I kind of didn't understand what this was, right? So that's my recommendation. Just one big one, or if it's like smaller games, like quick rounds, I think that's okay to do multiple in a class.
Great, thank you. We're at the end here. So I saw that there were a few other questions that also came in, and you can feel free to stick around and we can get to those momentarily. But if you have to run, it's 3 p.m. Eastern time. We thank you very much for your participation. Hope you had some fun with it. We will get in contact with the two winners. And you can always reach out to our team at contact@moblab.com to explore the platform a bit more. And we'll, Kelvin, if we can, we'll just hold on to you for another few minutes and answer these few questions that came through. And so one question is, how many quizzes do you have in total? And does that take a long time to input them into MobLab, from a time efficiency standpoint?
Yeah. So it changes every year. So last semester I had 79 quizzes, surveys and quizzes in total. And I had, I think about 40 lectures. And so you can kind of, there's about 2 per class. Some classes I do like 4, some classes I do 1, but yeah, I have about 80 and I try to do it every, 25 minutes, because I do think that's really a good way to re-engage students. If I think, after 20 minutes, I mean, even after like 5 minutes, let's be honest, students tend to lose focus. And having these quizzes are great because I let them work with each other. And so even if they fell asleep, now it's quiz time. Everyone is talking. They tend to wake up and they're like, what's going on? Oh, doing a quiz. So let me work on this now, right? And people can talk with each other, teach each other. One of my favorite part that I've missed last year was when I let students work together and I see students point to the board, drawing graphs with their hands, like, trying to convince each other, like, no, it should be this, or it should be that. Like, that is my favorite thing ever, right? Because they're actually trying to discuss it. They're trying to come up with it. When I discuss the answer right after, now it's going to be that much more relevant to them versus just like, I have no clue what's going on. So that's just what I do. So yeah, so I think, was that the question? How many quizzes? Oh, and how fast is it? It's super easy. Sometimes before class, like while I'm standing in the classroom before class starts, I'm like, oh, it'll be a really good idea to ask this question to start. And I just put a quiz into MobLab right away. So it's super fast to make a quiz. You can do one on the fly. Sometimes like I write a quiz as they're doing a quiz because I'm like, I want to do a follow-up example. And so it's really fast, but for the most part, I do use the material I just used previously. So maybe there was a fixed cost at the beginning to figure out like what I want to ask, but year after year, I just copy the course from the previous semester. I already have all the material there. And so prep time before a class is literally 0 because I really just walk into class and I run the same thing that I ran last semester at this point in the semester. and that's all that I do.
Thank you. And you can copy that content, as you said, from one semester to the
Yeah.
next.
Yep.
And staying on the topic of surveys, do you often show their responses live in class through that histogram you showed, or do you look at it more often later and kind of go over those results maybe in a subsequent session?
Yeah, if it helps, So I think with the surveys, if I ask them for their thoughts, so like, for example, I ask them, like, what are your thoughts on international trade right now? Sometimes, right? And so there's no right or wrong answer, but I do want to show them, what students are thinking. Or sometimes I ask them, like, give me an example of, something with an externality. And then I have a word cloud that I show them right away after, so they can kind of see what their classmates came up with. And so a lot of times I do that. But for the quizzes, I generally keep it to myself because, it really is for me to see like what students are getting or not. So if I see, for the most part, if I see like more than 80% of the class is getting a question, I think we're good. But sometimes I see like 50% getting a question, then I start thinking like, did I confuse them somehow? Did I ask it in the wrong way? So I use it for that. I don't show the class because then the class, might raise a issue with like, wait, what about, that question wasn't fair. It was 50%. But I tend to bring these up anyway. And it's easy to go back and just give points to everybody. It's easy to change an answer. So there's lots of things you can do in changing points and change, if you find a question unfair. The flexibility of MobLab is very nice, in those situations.
Thanks. And as just one final wrap up, from your experience teaching, do you use this in higher level courses or just in principles? Like I know that principles of micro is quite easy to gamify to a certain extent. Is there any other applications in some higher level courses as well?
Yeah, I've only really taught intermediate micro and principles of micro, so while I'm here, and I mean some upper level like classes as well online. But I haven't played, games in my upper level online classes. But in my intermediate micro classes, it was 5 years ago, and I don't remember whether I did games, but I know we have intermediate micro games, right? I mean, we have like the bird train competition games, the Stackelbergs, and so like they can play these games, and I now that I think about it, I don't think I ended up doing that in my intermediate class because that was my first year teaching, out of graduate school. So I didn't want, my first iteration of intermediate micro to like be too overwhelming. But there's certainly ways to add more complex games to give intuition. And I'm always surprised still when I taught intermediate that students don't have really the basic intuitions down even. When you ask them about market equilibriums, they can maybe solve a system of equations for you and say this is the equilibrium, but you ask them what that is and they have no clue. So I think even in those classes, there might be an advantage to playing even some of these simple games. I mean, maybe you can make it a little bit more advanced, but I do think the intuition is all throughout the econ major, and it never really leaves. And so I think students really do gain intuition from these games.
Great, thank you so much. And we do have within our library games mapped to managerial courses and IO courses, game theory, of course. And so it's kind of fun to explore that on your own and see how that may line up with your curriculum and your syllabus. But I think that will conclude our session today. Kelvin, thank you so much for being our panelist and speaking about your experience with MobLab. And thanks again to everyone for joining and your interesting questions on these various topics. So please feel welcome if you are interested in either learning more or you want to go over best practices with a member of our team. We're always happy to meet via Zoom these days and kind of set up some of this content for your courses and learn more about your students.